I don't want to remember the bad experience, but the memory is burned into my mind, as vivid as the day it happened. I was a small-town police officer, working the graveyard shift on a quiet night in late October. The air was crisp and the moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the empty streets. It should have been just another routine night, but fate had other plans for me. It started with a call about a disturbance at the old abandoned research facility on the outskirts of town. The place had been shut down for years, but every now and then we'd get a call about kids sneaking in or some strange noises. Usually it was nothing, just the wind howling through the broken windows or the creaking of the old rusted machinery. As I approached the building, I felt a shiver run down my spine. It wasn't just the chill in the air, there was something off about the place. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it made me uneasy. As I stepped inside, my flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls. The air was heavy, like a weight pressing down on me, making it difficult to breathe. As I walked down the darkened hallways, the sense of unease grew stronger. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, and the silence seemed to be closing in around me. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash from one of the rooms up ahead, and I instinctively drew my weapon. I approached the door slowly, my heart racing, and I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins. As I reached for the doorknob, the door flew open and a gust of wind slammed into me, knocking me off my feet. The last thing I remember, before everything went black, was the sound of my own scream echoing through the darkness. When I came to, I was lying on the cold, hard floor, my flashlight just out of reach. I blinked a few times, trying to regain my bearings, and as my vision cleared, I realized something was very, very wrong. The room I was in looked nothing like the abandoned research facility. Instead, it was a strange, dimly lit chamber filled with what appeared to be old, rusted medical equipment. As I got to my feet, my head spinning, I noticed a faint, sickly sweet smell hanging in the air. It was then that I heard it. The sound of footsteps approaching, accompanied by the sound of labored breathing. I reached for my gun, but it was gone, and all I had was my flashlight. Gripping it tightly, I stepped out into the hallway, my heart pounding. That's when I saw him, a man dressed in a tattered, blood-stained lab coat, his face twisted into a snarl. His eyes were wild, and there was a strange, otherworldly energy about him. In that moment, I knew that he was responsible for whatever had happened to me, and I was filled with a primal rage. I lunged at the man, my flashlight raised like a club, but he moved with a speed and agility that belied his age. He dodged my attack, and I stumbled past him, nearly losing my footing. He laughed, a cold, sinister sound that sent chills down my spine. "You're not supposed to be here," he hissed, his voice dripping with malice. "But no matter. You'll make an excellent specimen for my experiments." I didn't know what he meant, but I knew I had to escape. I ran, my legs pumping furiously as the man gave chase. As I sprinted through the twisted, labyrinthine hallways, I realized that I wasn't just in a different room, I was in a completely different time. The walls were lined with old, yellowed newspapers, their headlines screaming of events that had happened decades, even centuries before. As I passed by a cracked mirror, I saw that my own uniform had changed, the fabric worn and faded, as if it had aged along with me. With a start, I realized that the man chasing me was not just some crazed scientist, but a time traveler, and he had dragged me back into the past with him. If I didn't find a way to return to my own time, I would be trapped here, a prisoner in this nightmare world. As I ran, I could hear the man's footsteps getting closer and closer, and I knew that my time was running out. In a desperate bid for freedom, I stumbled upon a strange humming device hidden in one of the rooms. As I reached out for it, the man burst into the room, his eyes full of fury. But before he could stop me, I activated the device, and a blinding flash of light filled the room. When the light faded, I found myself back in the abandoned research facility, the night air cool on my skin. I was back in the present, and the time traveler was nowhere to be seen. I stumbled out of the facility, my mind reeling from the experience. I couldn't believe what had just happened to me. I knew that no one would believe my story, but the memory of that night would always haunt me. From that day on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the sense that something was just out of sight, waiting to pounce. I quit my job as a police officer, unable to face the possibility of encountering the time traveler again. But even now, years later, the memory of that night still lingers, a reminder of the horrors that can lurk just beyond our understanding. I was driving down the empty streets of our small town at midnight. As a police officer, I had become accustomed to the eerie atmosphere of the late hours, but tonight felt different. The air was heavy with a sense of foreboding that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Little did I know that my routine patrol would soon turn into a chilling encounter with the supernatural. The radio in my patrol car crackled to life, breaking my train of thought. Unit 43, we have a disturbance at 115 Elm Street. Neighbors are reporting loud noises and possible assault. Proceed with caution. I acknowledged the call and headed toward Elm Street, a quiet residential area. As I approached the house, the sense of unease grew stronger. There was something unsettling about the way the shadows flickered against the walls, as if the darkness itself was alive. I parked my car and stepped out into the cold night air, making my way toward the front door. I knocked, but there was no answer. The loud noises continued from inside, so I decided to enter. As I pushed open the door, the world around me seemed to change. The once familiar house now felt alien and hostile. Inside, I was greeted by a scene of chaos. Furniture was overturned and personal belongings were strewn about the floor. The air was thick with a palpable malevolence, and the temperature had dropped significantly. I shivered involuntarily, my breath visible in the frigid air. I called out, hoping to find anyone who might be in need of assistance. "Police! Is anyone here?" My voice seemed muffled, as if the darkness itself was swallowing the sound. There was no response, but I could hear movement coming from upstairs. I gripped my flashlight tightly and began to ascend the staircase, each step creaking under my weight. As I reached the top, I saw a door slightly ajar, with a flickering light spilling out into the hallway. I cautiously approached the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I pushed it open and was met with a sight that would haunt me for the rest of my life. A young woman was huddled in the corner of the room, her eyes wild with terror. Her once white nightgown was stained with blood, and her hands were bound with a length of chain. She stared at me, pleading for help, but her mouth was gagged with a filthy cloth. The room was in disarray, with strange symbols drawn in blood on the walls and floor. But what truly sent a shiver down my spine was the figure standing over her. It was a tall, dark figure, its face obscured by shadows. Its presence seemed to suck the light from the room, and the air around it was thick with a palpable evil. I instinctively reached for my gun, but as I did, the figure turned to face me. Its eyes seemed to burn into my soul, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. The air around me grew colder, and I found myself unable to move, paralyzed by fear. The figure spoke in a voice that was both guttural and ethereal, sending chills down my spine. "You cannot save her. She is mine." Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I managed to break free from the invisible grip that held me. I lunged forward, grabbing the young woman and pulling her away from the figure. As I did, the room suddenly erupted with a cacophony of otherworldly screams, and the walls seemed to close in around us. The figure let out a guttural roar, and I could feel the rage emanating from it. I dragged the woman down the stairs and out of the house, the demonic presence nipping at our heels. As we crossed the threshold, the house seemed to come alive, the walls shaking and the windows shattering. We made it to my patrol car, and I sped away from the cursed place. The woman was in shock, but she was alive. I would later learn that this was just the beginning of my encounters with the supernatural. The demon had marked me, and it would not rest until it had claimed my soul. But for now, I had survived my first brush with demonic possession. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a split second, I could swear I saw the figure standing in the doorway, watching us with burning eyes. The battle had only just begun. I remember the night like it was yesterday. It was a chilly October evening, and I was on patrol in downtown Los Angeles. It was a typical night, with the usual noise and chaos of the city filling the air. But then, something caught my attention. It was a strange, otherworldly feeling, like a shiver running down my spine. I knew something was wrong, and I followed my instincts to a dark alleyway. As I approached the alley, I could see two figures lying on the ground. As I got closer, I could see that they were both dead. Their bodies were twisted and contorted, as if they had been writhing in pain before they died. I immediately called for backup, and the scene was secured. The bodies were taken away for examination, and I began to investigate what had happened. But as I dug deeper into the case, I realized that there was something strange and paranormal at work. The bodies were covered in strange symbols and markings, and there was a feeling of dark energy in the air. I knew that this was not a normal case, and I began to delve deeper into the world of the paranormal. I consulted with experts and specialists, trying to unravel the mystery of what had happened in that alleyway. As I continued my investigation, I began to experience strange phenomena myself. I would hear whispers in the night, and see shadows moving in the corners of my vision. It was as if the spirits of the dead were reaching out to me, trying to communicate something. And then, one night, I saw something that I could not explain. It was a ghostly figure, floating in the air above the city. It seemed to be watching over the city, its ethereal form shimmering in the moonlight. I knew then that I was dealing with something beyond my understanding. I continued to investigate, but I felt as if I was only scratching the surface of a much larger and more complex mystery. As time passed, more and more bodies were found in similar circumstances. Each one was covered in strange symbols and markings, and there was a feeling of dark energy in the air. I knew that I was in over my head, and I turned to the experts for help. Together, we delved deeper into the world of the paranormal, uncovering ancient rituals and practices that had long been forgotten. We worked tirelessly day and night to unravel the mystery of the dead bodies in Los Angeles. And finally, after months of investigation, we found the source of the dark energy that had been haunting the city. It was a powerful demon, one that had been summoned from the depths of hell to wreak havoc on the mortal world. It had possessed several individuals, using them as vessels to carry out its twisted agenda. Together, we performed a powerful ritual to banish the demon back to the underworld. It was a grueling battle, and we barely survived. But in the end, we were victorious. The streets of Los Angeles were safe once again, and the dark energy that had been haunting the city was gone. But the memory of that time still lingers with me, a reminder of the dark and dangerous world that exists beyond our own. I was a police officer working in a prison located on the outskirts of the city. It was a high-security prison where some of the most dangerous criminals in the state were held. As a part of my duty, I had to keep an eye on the inmates and make sure that everything was under control. However, one night, something strange happened that I could never forget. It was a quiet night, and I was patrolling the prison corridors, making sure that everything was in order. Suddenly, I heard some strange noises coming from one of the cells. It sounded like someone was scratching the walls. I rushed to the cell to investigate, but as soon as I reached there, the noise stopped. I shone my flashlight on the cell walls, trying to see if there was any sign of damage or escape. However, there was nothing out of the ordinary. I shrugged it off as a random noise and continued with my patrol. As I was walking down the corridor, I saw something moving in the shadows. At first I thought it was one of the inmates trying to escape, but as I got closer, I realized that it was something else. It was a creature, unlike anything I had ever seen before. The creature was about 6 feet tall, with a scaly body and glowing red eyes. Its arms were long and thin, with sharp claws at the end. It looked at me and I froze. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I drew my gun ready to shoot if the creature attacked me, but it didn't. It just stood there, staring at me. I didn't know what to do, so I slowly backed away, keeping my gun trained on the creature. As I was walking backward, I heard more noises coming from the other cells. I turned around and saw more creatures emerging from the shadows. They all looked the same, with scaly bodies, long arms, and sharp claws. I was surrounded, and I knew that I was in trouble. I tried to call for backup, but my radio wasn't working. I was on my own. The creatures started moving towards me, and I knew that I had to act fast. I fired a warning shot, hoping that it would scare them off, but it didn't. They kept coming towards me. I fired another shot, this time aiming for one of the creatures. It hit it in the chest, but it didn't seem to affect it. It just kept coming towards me. I was about to fire again when suddenly the creature stopped. They looked at me for a few seconds and then retreated back into the shadows. I was confused, but I didn't waste any time. I ran towards the exit, hoping to get out of the prison as fast as possible. As I was running, I saw more creatures in the shadows, but they didn't come after me. When I finally got out of the prison, I was gasping for air. I looked back at the building, and it was silent. There was no sign of the creatures or any disturbance. I reported what I had seen to my superiors, but they didn't believe me. They thought that I had imagined everything, but I knew what I had seen, and I couldn't forget it. After that night, I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the creatures. I couldn't understand what they were or why they were there. But I knew one thing for sure. They were not of this world. Years have passed since that night, but I still remember it vividly. I have never seen anything like it again, and I hope I never will. But the memory of the creature still haunts me, and I know that I will never forget it.